All right, so Blood Harmony by J. Wilburn. John Eskew, I'm naming all my characters John right now, I guess. John Eskew stepped out of his 6-year-old Mercedes in front of a mostly unpainted dance hall that was rocking and vibrating with hoots and foot stomps. The faded letters beside the open barn style doors declared this was the cornmeal warehouse. Um, it, it was either an ironic name or what the building had been used for in the past. All right. I want to change that. Let's say the cornmeal and beet warehouse. It was either an ironic name or what the building had been used at before. Okay. John spied a few older men in fading and tearing denim leaning on a log fence across the mountain road from the gravel lot. Let's say from the warehouses. From the warehouses gravel lot. He was glad he had opted not to wear the suit and tie for this official business. He still stood out as someone who did not belong here. They could probably smell the stink of a city lawyer off him from over there. His car was far nicer than any truck in this lot. It was the oldest. It was the oldest. It was the oldest vehicle. Okay, need to do some repairs on this sentence here. It was always. All right, let's try this. It was always the oldest vehicle anytime he parked at the firm. Parked back at the firm. That was part of the reason he was here and not one of the partners. They had sent cease and desist. Let me make this a new paragraph. They had sent cease and desist orders to every address they could dig up. They had sent messengers with actual lawsuit paperwork, but like all the ceases and desists, they had come. Like all the ceases and desists, they had come back without ever finding the town of Bowler. Sorry. They had tried to call every local sheriff they could track down, and they all said that Bowler was outside their jurisdiction. The ones who had heard of it each thought it was in a different state from them. So now John was here with his two nice but out of date Mercedes. Let me put dashes there. Out of date Mercedes. He had at least found this unincorporated patch of Appalachia, but he had no clue whether he was in Kentucky or West Virginia or some magical place between states and dimensions. As he looked for the home of Melody or Shirley Bow, real name Bowler, like most everyone else in town, people directed him to the warehouse where the girls were to sing with the house band that evening. Say that very evening. Maybe his luck was turning around. Of course, this is a horror story, so his luck is in fact not turning around, but we need him to think so. It was still light, but the party was already in full swing by the sound of things. John slipped through the doors and tried to stay close to the walls and off most people's radar. Of course, he failed. Eyes cut to him and nostrils flared like they. I need to put a comma there. And nostrils flared like they had located a dead thing that was the source of a persistent smell that had been bothering them for a while. Eventually, after every eye fell to him, comma, the attention slid away because even a fancy city interloper like him wasn't a fraction as interesting as the ragged, slamming bluegrass music threatening to blow out the old wooden planks of the warehouse. Beat House was a good name for the venue. All right. So we got that. There were two banjo players. Someone pounded away at a piano as old as the building itself, like it was a rhythm instrument. There were guitars, fiddles, and several things with strings or valves that John had no name for. Of course, there were jugs, washboards, and other rickrack backing up the more formal instruments. There was a third banjo player that John had missed in the first survey. He did not see the singers as the instrumental number. Okay. Cascaded onward as if the players had no idea how, or maybe no power to, stop this song ever. They were all men. No, he was wrong. Two women as old as the hills played a couple instruments. He was wrong again. There were definitely only two banjo players, but way more people on stage than he first saw. Okay. Something weird's going on here. The crowd shook the world with their clapping and foot stomping. Wait, there they were. He did not see them walk onto stage, but they must. Okay, this is an editing block, so we're going to try and get this right. But they must have slipped in, because they slipped out of the shadows into the light at the front, and the crowd went wild. Let me put another comma there. The crowd went wild, seeing them for the first time themselves. John wasn't sure which Bow sister was which, but the duo was Blood Harmony, and he was here on behalf of Captura Records to serve them papers and notice of the lawsuit against them for their band name. He wasn't sure whether he should drop those papers on the girls themselves or on whoever served as their guardian, maybe a manager if one showed himself. He couldn't gauge their ages. Over or under, he had no idea. The dark-haired sister could have been 14 or 28. The redhead could have been 12 or 22. If he thought about it too much, it made him dizzy. All right, as the crowd finally died down, the band didn't really stop, but sort of dropped back, lulled, and then came together in a more coherent tune. It must have been one the crowd was hoping for and recognized, because they went wild again. John had zero intention of serving papers during the performance. This posse of fans would likely tear him apart if he did, and as far as he could tell, no sheriff held jurisdiction over this stretch of mountain road between states and between worlds. Not only would no one come to the dirty lawyer's rescue as he tried to sue two lovely young women who just wanted to sing their hearts out, not sign. That would be a whole different story. Sing their hearts out, but no one would be able to even find the crime scene if they looked. For a moment, he almost bolted from the door with the intention to start driving, keep driving, until he found a big city he knew in some other state. Captura Records didn't really have a lawsuit anyway. They were just pissed that this isolated pair that went by Blood Harmony took up more of the internet than the country pop band that had signed with the same name. John stayed. He hung in the back of the hall in a dark corner, but he stayed. Then the girls hit their first note, and he was cold all the way to his soul. Everyone else in the crowd, those who clearly had heard these voices do their thing before, felt it too. He saw a woman and a bearded man nearby shiver at the same time. More than a few people pulled their arms into their sides and folded their hands over their chests as they looked and listened with rapt attention. John felt like that first syllable lasted an eon, but then there were several words into the verse as his mind caught back up with time. The words were packed with meaning and symbolism, but at the same time, the words themselves were meaningless because the sounds were beyond perfect. They truly were blood harmony in a way that he had never heard in all his years as a music fan and as a lawyer for music companies. They could have been one voice, but they were two souls with distinct sounds that simply matched in a way that many couldn't accomplish in a full studio with auto-tune used at full power. They sung of waterfalls and trails that wound over mountains that you knew from generational memory but were seeing for the first time. Words rhymed that seemed secret and beautiful in their poetry, but then John couldn't recall how they did it. They sung of a fork in the road and fear that both paths were wrong, or worse, that both paths led to heaven, and taking one robbed them of half a life on the other. Tears stung his eyes, and he fought to hold on to those words because they defined his life. Words that encapsulated all his hopes and fears and other feelings he had no word for, but had felt his entire life were discovered here today. All right, I'm sure there's some commas needed in there, but I'm not putting any. But he couldn't hold them. He knew he would lose control of his tongue and begged them to sing this song again right away. He needed those words sung to him again. And only by these precious singers. No other voices would ever do. Not hearing this song again, even though it wasn't yet over, would be losing half of heaven, like that verse had lamented in harmony with his soul. He could not hold them in his mind or heart, because the next verses were as moving as the last. They sang of a world set against you, with the borders eating away every moment. Sorrow steals your sleep. How you fight your whole life to protect your home, only to turn around and find, let me fix a typo here, and find that it has been gone for a long time. It rotted away with time the whole time you fought for it and never really appreciated it. John tried to wipe his eyes. He had to use his whole arm to do it because the stage was nothing but a blur now. Even as he finished, it was no good. This was a storm brewing in secret inside him for the longest, and the tears would fall like raindrops for a good while, sir. That tear raindrop metaphor was part of the chorus. My God, it was going to break his heart to hear that again when the chorus came back around. John swooned. He actually swooned. If he wasn't back in a cobwebby corner already, he'd have fallen to the floor for sure. He braced on the wall one way and then the other. He actually lost his balance in two directions, but managed to keep his feet. How he did so would remain a mystery to him for the rest of his life. The song came out of the final chorus in that too perfect harmony and gave one more quiet line about that haunting fork in the road you'd never find again, just like you couldn't go home again. As the girls ended exactly together, the band managed to find the end of the song too. Applause thundered to go with the falling rain of tears, spotting the dusty floor all through the hall. John had kept his feet, but others... Hold on. Need to change that to plural. But others fell to their knees, and he swore they were speaking in tongues like a charismatic revival service. John went on applauding, but noted there had been no mention of God in those lovely lyrics. The girls thanked the crowd with deep accents that twanged in a way that did not match the beauty of their singing at all. The band started again, and the girls broke into the next song with exact timing. The divine nature of their voices made the flaws of the players in the band stand out worse than John did in this crowd. The mistakes made by the instruments brought up a deep anger in him. He wanted to claw and punch the old musicians, to punish them for being unworthy of on the same stage as these angels. He also wanted to drive back into civilization, gather those selfish record executives, tie them up in his trunk, and bring them back here to answer for their crimes by trying to stop this perfect thing that existed in the world. In that moment, during that second song of the evening, he was willing to join these hillbillies in ripping those men limb from limb. Hold on. Yeah, I used the wrong thing here. Just a moment. He'd tear out their guts with his manicured fingers. Let's say fingernails. All right. John would gouge their eyes and pull out their lying, godless tongues from their roots. He'd only stop if they told him to, and not a moment before. And if he'd only stop if the Bow sisters, told him to, and not a moment before. If his hands and feet gave out, he would use his teeth to punish them more. Let's say punish those men. To punish those men more. By the time he blinked himself back into the present, they were on their fourth number. He forced himself to pay attention. This was not a moment to drift off into his own thoughts. This moment, this music, these voices were everything. He was going to soak up every note like it was a fountain of eternal life. This song was actually called Living Water. That was a great name. Blood Harmony was a great name for them, too. No other group nor combination of singers deserved it more than the Bow Sisters. John spent lifetimes in that dusty, dirty hall. Universes rose and fell as he listened to music that made him believe in God. At least some God that held perfect power over this postage stamp of land, mostly made of sloping hillsides and tree-rich mountains. I'm going to leave it like that. I was going to put a dash, but I don't need to. Whoever was responsible for this moment in John's life, he was paying worship. As the final number ended sometime well into the night, the crowd gave everything they had in the final round of applause. No dry eyes, voices that weren't already hoarse from too much cheering. Managed to cheer some more. All right, I left off the end of that sentence. All right, the sisters bowed in unison. Of course, it was in unison, just like everything they did. When they went over there with their perfect hair flying behind them, they couldn't have been a day over 10 years old. As they rose together with their cheeks flushed with vital life, they looked to be just shy of 30, with sweat glistening over their faces and eyes that spoke of wisdom beyond even the oldest musicians in that ancient bluegrass house band. All right, here's why I want to add this in. They wore flowered dresses. John wasn't sure he had noticed that detail before then. Before the final bow. What had he thought they were wearing before? He couldn't recall. The dresses didn't match, but the patterns and colors harmonized. All right, there we go. I wanted to add in what they were wearing at some point, and I meant to do it at the beginning, but I think it works better there with this whole, like, nothing quite seems as it is situation. As the others in the room gathered their things, the spell appeared to be broken in them. Maybe they were partially inoculated to the power of this performance. John couldn't imagine. Okay. John couldn't imagine. They were all engaged in good-natured conversation about their wonderful evening. As John pushed through them to get to the stage, he caught multiple mentions of blood harmony, those wonderful girls, gifts from God, and one man distinctly whispered the words mud music as John slid by behind the old fellow's back. I need to put a comma or a apostrophe there because the back belongs to the old fellow. He wasn't going to be serving papers. He wasn't sure what he planned to do when he reached the stage. Maybe he was going to drop to his knees and fold to his face as he worshipped at their feet. Perhaps he was going to offer to be their lawyer, leave his life behind, live in these hills, and defend the true blood harmony to the death. He never got that far, though. He never got, let's say, that far. though. Several hands locked onto him and dragged him sideways toward the open barn doors. Let's say at the front of the warehouse. Okay. His feet never really touched the ground once. Never really touched the ground. I don't need to put once there, that's just confusing. Until they had him outside. Like before, a few folks cast him a look, but then found other things to hold their interest. Outside, the evening was wonderfully cool in comparison to the sultry heat from all those bodies and lights inside. They took him around the corner and into the shadows. In that last instant, in the light, in that last instant, comma, in the light from inside, he recognized the old men from across the road. They were much stronger than they had looked before dark. Let's put a comma there. And they hadn't looked all that feeble before. They dropped him on a soft clump of clover and weeds behind the warehouse. Let's say this area had a distinct urine smell about it. Let's make that a new paragraph. The pause that followed was so long that John started to get up on his own. Insects made their disharmonic music shrill through the dark night. Other voices came muffled through the board walls above him. The wind left out a word. The wind whispered through the branches deeper in the darkness. All these sounds were imperfect. After what he heard tonight, not even the voices of nature could compare. It made him angry. He was furious at the world for singing so poorly, and at these men for taking him away from perfection. Before he could get off his hands and knees, they went to work on him with their fists, knees, and boots. It wasn't long before John curled up and tried to survive the onslaught. Tried to simply survive. These men pounded on him with a relentless rhythm that reminded him of that gnarly piano player. They attacked John and missed each other. They attacked John, let's say, as they missed each other. As they avoided each other. Like they were beating down a spike into the ground with practiced precision. His eyes swelled closed. He choked on his own blood, and something hot broke open inside his gut. He wished for death, but unconsciousness finally came as a consolation prize. He woke up multiple times during the night in that patch of weeds and piss smell where they left him. He couldn't judge the time because he couldn't get his eyes opened before he passed out again. When he finally came to and couldn't drop back out to hide from the pain any longer, he used his fingers to force his swollen eyes open. He almost needed to cut them like a fighter trying to see again, but he got enough of a slit open for each one that he could see the first hints of dawn behind the trees and over the severe hills. Getting to his feet again was no small effort. All his joints hurt. His lower back could take no pressure. Even the weight of leaning too far out one way or the other could take no pressure. Let's say not even the weight of, not even his weight from leaning too far one way or the other. Let's say his own weight. Sorry about that. I'm trying to get this sentence right. Okay. His own weight too far the other. One elbow wouldn't straighten, and one knee, need a comma there. One knee really didn't want to bend. where it had swollen up tight inside his pant leg. He shuffled around the building, getting splinters in the heel of his hand as he tried to use the long outside wall for support. As he reached the front, that hot, deeply wounded feeling in his gut swirled again. John feared something had been ruptured and that he would die here anyway. His Mercedes was the only vehicle left in the lot. The barn doors were closed and padlocked with a chain that looked thick enough to tow a battleship. He was surprised to see his car intact. No broken or cracked windows, no dents, no scratches, and no flat tires. John felt around his pockets with his good hand, but didn't find his keys. He felt his wallet still in place, but no keys. He tried the handle, and the driver's door opened. He knew he had locked it. He knew he had locked it yesterday. The keys were in the ignition and waiting for him. He knew he hadn't left them there. John had trouble turning his neck, but as far as he could see, nothing had been taken or moved inside his car. The old men from the fence seemed happy to let him drive away if he still could. He wrestled with the door, his seatbelt, and the ignition, but got the car started and put in reverse. Anger rose up inside him on top of the hot swirl of ruptured injury in his gut. He took deep breaths over swollen lips that were split in at least 3 places. A few of his teeth stung at the roots. As he sucked breath over them, he didn't have the heart to feel with any with his fingers to see if any of them were cracked or broken. Hey, Generama, are you about to pick up dinner or something, or are you just coming by to say hi? He decided he would be charging medical expenses to the firm. That cost would be passed on to Captura Records as well, he was sure. John managed to fight back tears before they came. He feared they would sting too much, and he could barely see as it was. He revved backward. Food's already here. Oh, my goodness. Okay. He revved backward where he heard and felt the log fence break apart on his trunk and bumper. He supposed they had left his car intact for nothing. It felt good to rob those old hillbillies of their favorite leaning spot. Give them a little something to remember him by. It was a small retaliation, but for now, that was all he had in him. I'm going to eat all the California rolls. Oh my goodness, she brought home Japanese food. All right, I'm going to finish up this story, and then we're going to call it an evening. All right. Don't eat all the California rolls. I'll be there in just a second, I promise. All right. As he drove slowly along the winding road with steep rises and falls, he decided he wasn't done with these rednecks or their singing offspring. The spell from last night was broken, along with possibly a couple of his teeth. John took this personally now for obvious reasons. Whatever they had, he would take it. What they couldn't give, he would see them in prison for it. Those girls might be lovely singers, but they would never see a dime that John didn't take from them for this. He had just been here to serve papers. The case probably wouldn't have gone anywhere. He enjoyed the music. He clapped and cheered along with the rest of the poor hill people. There was no reason to treat him like this. If no sheriff wanted a part of this, then he'd get the state boys involved and would help them find the town if they didn't already know where it was. He tried the radio, but all he got was screaming preachers and twanging bluegrass. None of it was transcendent. He wondered if music would ever move him again anywhere close to how it did that previous night. He started to feel tears trying to escape again, so he rolled down his window to get some air, and then to get more air than the vents were offering. That's when he heard it. John slowed down to little more than an idle. Those voices were unmistakable. He didn't recognize the song carrying over the hills through the gullies, but there were no other voices like those two. Morning practice, he wondered. I'm going to italicize that. You couldn't get that good without practice, even with God-given blood harmony. All right. He hesitated at the dirt road for just a moment, but then made the turn. The weather had been dry, so even though his car bottomed out a few times on the eroded path, he never got bogged down. He passed houses that seemed to be built off of trailers, some with multiple floors, some that defied physics and looked to be added upon for generations of families. How that stapled and pasted together trash stayed whole was a mystery to him, but John was focused on something else. The woods appeared to be closing in on him, but those voices still lay ahead. The light through the branches took on an odd blue tone that made him think of later in the day instead of the morning he knew it was. Think of, say, the quality of light from later in the day instead of the morning he knew it was. The last shack appeared to be made of the same boards as the old warehouse. There was a tire swing, of course. Those girls, the sisters, Melody and Shirley, sat on the warped steps in what appeared to be matching burlap dresses. They held each other's hands as, let's say the flowered dresses must have been saved for show nights. Let's say gigs. Saved for gigs. They held each other's hands as they sang into each other's faces. It was just as lovely as the night before. John stopped in the grass and fought his way out of his seatbelt. Maybe it was more lovely because he was the only one here besides the harmonizing duo. All right, I'm going to change something I know here in this later part that's kind of been bothering me, so we'll get to that here as we finish up. He felt his back pocket and was surprised to find the legal papers there. John actually smiled as much as his ruined lips would allow. He imagined himself walking into the partner's office looking like this and telling them he had successfully served the papers. The pages were creased and a little smeared with dried sweat, but they were legible if these two or their folks could actually read. He checked the glove compartment and found the modest handgun still there. He opened it with an effort and found it still loaded. John carefully shoved it in his back pocket. He couldn't submit to another beatdown if it came to that, but he also wasn't keen on getting into a shootout. All right, I need to fix that. Into a shootout with people who probably hunted for their supper on the regular. He got out, made sure no one else was lurking about, and limped toward the porch and the singing sisters. That terrible, sick burning increased inside him. All right. They sung of the end of the road, the closing of days, finding something to be thankful for in the midst of suffering and the beauty of learning things the hard way. It was easily as beautiful as any song he heard the night before. It was just as deep and just as tone perfect. It would haunt like every lyric he'd experienced yesterday. Still, seeing them sing in locked harmony, staring rapt into each other's faces, struck him still, this morning, seeing them sing in locked harmony, staring rapt into each other's faces, struck him as creepy and unnatural now that morning had dawned and light filtered blue into this isolated yard and this sagging old shack. Sagging old shack. All right. His gut churned again, and he gritted his teeth. He lost control of his bladder a little and thought maybe his bowels had cut loose a little too. Alright. John supposed that getting beaten half to death and left for dead on the side of the road took a lot of magic out of the local music scene. Then he heard... I'm going to move this paragraph, sorry. Okay, we'll say that took the rest of the magic out of the day, he thought. Okay, very good. All right, so we're gearing him up here for a hurt. Okay. Then he heard the rustling all around. It conflicted with the beauty of the song and brought anger up through his center, through his burning center again. The rustling did not match the wind, so he turned his whole body to see because his neck would not cooperate. All right. Almost finished here, folks. They emerged all around. He struggled to get the gun loose from his pocket without shooting himself in the backside. When it wouldn't come free, he dropped the legal papers in the grass and tore his pants to get the gun out. Then anger melted into cold fear. The people closing in on him from all sides were as blue as the filtered light. Some had dark holes where their eyes should be. Others had black pits that opened into their skulls where their noses used to be. They groaned and shuffled and reached for the lawyer, who presumed to silence the music. He got off most of the rounds. From the loaded gun. The ones that hit heads brought the shambling men down. Other bullets just tore through bone and decaying flesh without reaction. All right, they brought him down to the ground. No, I don't want to do that. This is where I want to change. They did not touch him, but his own body betrayed him, and the swirling pain of his internal injuries brought him down to the ground. Alright, so we're going to change these. So they didn't bring him down to the ground. He didn't. He brought himself down to the ground. He didn't have much fight left in him, but he kicked and screamed as they stood over him, ignoring him and swaying to the music. He had seen, let's make this a new paragraph. He had seen plenty of zombie movies, but these dead people did not bite or claw. Okay. I didn't want this to just be a simple zombie thing at the end. Did not bite or claw into him. They were here for the music. The whole time, John sunk down into the darkness, comma, he could still hear the music. He could still hear the music too. All right, we're in the home stretch here, folks, and then I'm going to go eat some Japanese food. After the spurt of violence had ended, those oldest citizens of Boiler stood and swayed quietly with the morning. After the spurt, it wouldn't be violence. After the painful gyrations of the lawyer finally stilled, these oldest citizens of Boiler stood and swayed quietly with the morning music. Some of them still had bits of moist black soil in the folds of their rotting clothes and clinging to the last wispy strands of their hair. John eventually stood too. Let's say John eventually stood too. The pain wasn't gone, but his mind had dulled to it. Okay, the pain wasn't gone, but his mind has dulled to it as he stood swaying with the others, with his jaw hanging slack. A little blood. Alright. A little blood spilled from his open mouth. Bearing witness to what might have finally brought him down that morning. All right. Burning sensation in his gut were gone. No, I left it in there. Okay. Very good. He stood on the ruined folds of the legal papers, but paid them no mind. The music never left his ears. It spoke to his soul. John Eskew swayed with the music for a good long while. And it made him cold with its beauty. All right. Very good. So now he wasn't killed by zombies. There's just the music either raises the dead or speaks to them. All right, I like that ending a lot better.